Okay, so we're going to be talking about stem cells and more specifically the types of stem cells that we can find. Now, generally speaking, there are two types of stem cells. And so we need to know what these two types are. The first are the embryonic stem cells. More commonly known as ESCs. And if they come from humans, they're HESCs, so lowercase h ESCs. Okay, and then we also have adult stem cells. Adult stem cells. Now these are the two types, and it's important to know the distinct properties of these two types of stem cells, as well as their sources. As well as their sources. I think the sources are pretty self-explanatory just from the name. So the embryonic stem cells, we call them as such because they are sourced from embryos, and the adult stem cells, they come from adult tissue. Now the properties of these two different kinds of stem cells are very distinct. So let's make a dividing line between these. With embryonic stem cells, what we find is that they are relatively undifferentiated. Relatively undifferentiated. So they're not particularly specialized. They have a lot of potential to become specialized as a result. So if you are undifferentiated, that is not specialized, you have the potential to undergo specialization. And we'll look at later why this is such a useful property. And because they're undifferentiated, they can become, and this is a sub-description, can become many types of cell. So they have high levels of potency. And we'll look at potency just in a moment. What we also know about embryonic stem cells is that they can actually replicate indefinitely under the specific conditions. And this particular property makes it really useful for in therapeutical applications. So they can replicate indefinitely. So I would say these are the main points, the main properties of the embryonic stem cells. Adult stem cells that we'd find in adult tissue, they're present in very small numbers. In adult tissue. And they can only give rise to a limited range of cells. So adult stem cells have already been somewhat specialized. They've differentiated a little bit, which means that then they don't have as much potential or as high a potency as the embryonic stem cells. So an example of one such adult stem cell that can only give rise to a limited range of cell are bone marrow stem cells. So bone marrow stem cells, they're also known as the hematopoietic stem cells. If you want, and this word here, if you break it down, hemato refers to blood, the Greek word for blood, and poietic means producing, and this is from Latin or Greek. So these are the blood-producing stem cells. So the stem cells that give rise to pretty much every cell you would find in the blood. So we've got this diagram over here from your textbook from page 373. this hematopoietic stem cell here can differentiate into a limited range of cells. So it can't differentiate into any kind of cell that you'd find in your body, but only the cells that you would find in your blood. So those include the red blood cells here, the erythrocytes, certain white blood cells. These are the white blood cells over here. Well, I think granulocytes also count as white blood cells. And the cells that produce platelets. So these are all the cells that you would find floating around in your blood doing various things, and they all derive from one kind of adult stem cell. But that stem cell can only give rise to the blood cells. Okay, so we have those two properties. Got a couple more. Now the purposes of the adult stem cells are to repair and regenerate damaged and aged tissue. So where we would find a lot of damaged and aged tissue are the skin or the blood. So this is skin, blood, or liver. So it's around these areas of the body where there's a high turnover of cells that we have these stem cells that can differentiate. So stem cells that can replicate to repair or regenerate damaged tissue. Okay. And the last thing, and this distinguishes it from the embryonic stem cells, is that they do not replicate indefinitely. So they have a lifespan before they can no longer replicate. So this limits their use in therapeutical applications. Okay. So we've looked at the two types of stem cells, and we've distinguished between them in terms of where they are sourced and their properties. I should point out that the contents of this particular page refer to the VCE study design key knowledge descriptor, which is listed here. So we're looking at the types and function of stem cells in human development, including the distinction between embryonic and adult stem cells. It's important to note that like anything that is listed inside that study design, you can be examined on. And at Unit 3 and 4, this is a really important thing to note it. Like if there's anything that you find on the VCE study design, that can be a source of your questions on your exam. So it's a good starting point for your revision. All right, so now we're looking at potency over here. Potency is another aspect of stem cells that we should look at. And potency can be defined as a cell's ability to differentiate into other cell types. Okay? So cell types, cell's ability to differentiate to other cell types. So if a cell can differentiate into more cell types, then it has a higher potency. So the more cell types a cell can differentiate into, the higher the potency. Okay, so this is a key definition right there. All right. Now, if you look at the different levels of potency, we have at the top, at the highest level of potency, I'll just draw an arrow here from lowest level of potency to highest. The highest is totipotency, total potency. And we see this with the zygote. And actually we can expand beyond the zygote to also up to the 16 cell morula. So the zygote, we'll look at embryonic development on another page. The zygote and also the 16-cell morula can differentiate into any kind of cell that we would find in the adult human body. Now the next level of potency is pluripotency, and we observe this in the blastocysts. We can also find this in some germ cells. They call them PGC cells. These are primordial germ cells, and these give rise to the gametes in adults. So adults, they produce their gametes from these cells here. These cells are technically pluripotent. But generally speaking, totipotency and pluripotency is reserved for the embryonic stem cells. So if you had to categorize embryonic stem cells, they would fall under either one of these two categories of potency. Unipotency and multipotency are for the adult stem cells. So adult stem cells, usually fall under these two categories. And so the stem cells, such as the hematopoietic stem cells, like these ones we've looked at up here, they're multipotent. So they can differentiate into different kinds of cells. But there are quite a few adult stem cells that can only differentiate into one kind of cell. And these are the unipotent stem cells. All right. But in terms of multipotent stem cells, we also have these cells here from the gastrula. Now, the gastrula are not adult, not found in the, it's not like an adult structure. It's actually one of the early embryonic development structures or masses of cells. And these have the three different germ layers here. And the three different germ layers, and we'll look at what these are on another page. The ectoderm, endoderm, mesoderm. Okay, so, but pluripotent cells have a higher potency than the multipotent cells. It's important to know from where we would observe those kinds of cells.